Hey folks, Tony Lockhart here. This is the last video that I'm going to focus on for the foundational node view instruction. And I figured it'd be a good idea to take a look at some different characters. Now, these are all 2D puppets made by my students, and they're all high school animation kids, but they're really fantastic. As you can tell, they're very talented. But I really like the idea of creating some form of a character all done with paper and these brass fasteners. So part of the reason I think these characters are so clever is because it teaches you the concepts of how the node view actually works. And it gives you a sense of what is the most important piece on the character's body. Also, like it's a tactile thing. So if you've gained anything from the videos on this channel, you realize, or hopefully you realize, like, okay, it's a big deal to actually try to find some kind of a tangible prop to help you with how you do your animation. Because, like, this stuff is super critical. It's just so smart with the way it's constructed. And as you try to go and rig this type of a character, you need to ask yourself, like, okay, who's the boss and how does this thing work? It's just, again, it's very clever in that you have two pieces for the torso, so you get some kind of movement. It's clever in that there's a hair item that's clipped at the back. And this is really smart because this looks like a decorative piece, like a crown, as a pivot point for the back of the hair. If you try this, make sure you leave enough material at the base of the neck. And then sometimes it's fun to do some kind of an outline, but also consider how you would go and rig this character. Ask yourself, would would this part of the hips be the boss, or would this top part of the torso be the boss? Another thing to consider is, like, how many pieces will you use for the accessories? Now, I think this is neat. It looks like there's another face which could be rigged over here, but then here's the main face. And then we got a two-piece arm that's right there. We got another two-piece arm. You could easily make that into a three-piece, but it's always going to come down to who's the boss and which piece is going to make all of the others travel. So in this case, I'm holding the torso and the legs are going to go and follow it. So are the arms and whatever this thing is right here. So here's the last one that I want to share. I think, it's very tough as a teacher. You don't want to choose favorites. But there's just something about this character that really speaks to me. It's just a funny character, and it's just smart and interesting with how it's made. I think it's pretty fascinating how there's some kind of a pivot point, and there's a piece right here, kind of like an upper shoulder, and then you could see some of the other wing right there, and then this is probably, I don't want to call it a hand because it's a bird, but like it gives a certain range of mobility with this character, even though it's all on rotational pivot points. So I think this is clever. So let's go take this and put it into the computer and just try to figure out, like, oh, okay, like how can we set this thing up appropriately?
So I recommend starting with the sketch when building out your character. The zoom feature is helpful when determining proportion issues because you can quickly identify if body parts need to change in size. The next step in the process is to systematically create all of those drawing layers. Make sure you use clear naming conventions like front and back when you differentiate the arms and the legs. It's also worth noting that Harmony does not like empty spaces in naming conventions with layers and stuff. So you should use capitalization and dashes and underscores when you name some of these things. In this segment, I'm focusing on grouping all of my artwork layers in the node view. I like having them in close proximity because it makes the visual clutter much more manageable. I also want to point out that this is a beginner's video, meaning that these techniques are super basic. There are some really clever strategies for cleaning up and grouping info in the node view, but we're just going to focus on the foundational stuff in this video. So, I recommend using a pass-through composite because it allows you to organize your layer arrangement and your peg connections away from the main composite. More about that later. Now it's time to make the actual artwork. I recommend setting up your color palette and using the fill shape and draw behind features found in the tool properties menu. Notice that I draw each piece with the outline artwork first. I use broken lines so the shapes don't fill with black paint. And when it's time to fill the shapes, I'll change the color, and in one continuous brush stroke, I'll draw a closed shape. In areas where the arms or legs get bent, I'll make sure that there's a rounded area of color, and that's going to help with the illusion of the body part that's not going to break as it's deformed when bending. The idea behind all of this is that you quickly and efficiently build all of your character shapes without doing too many clicks around in the interface. When it comes to rigging, the same principles covered throughout this playlist of videos will apply. You set up pivot points and you use the transformation tool to see if the artwork moves appropriately. Think of this as trying to get your character to break. When setting up relationships between nodes, I like to huddle them all together and stack them vertically because it mimics the parent-child relationship. Try to imagine parents being taller and higher up, and the smaller children are just below them. Alright, so in this last segment, I just want to point out a handful of things about this rig. I set up a few poses to highlight aspects that I'm going to talk about. And at first glance, my node view looks like a small city with 5 groupings of nodes, but let's kind of dive in a little bit deeper. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is the main composite. Note that I have the display in the right nodes coming right out of the composite. I also have my original sketch layer and my color cards, so those are off to the side. But what I've done is I've taken this entire character and I've put it into a body composite. This is like a separate piece that allows me to go and put just one cable into the main composite. Also, it's easy for me to go and take all of these original pieces of artwork, which is like the front leg and the back leg and the arm and the leg and stuff like that. That's all in one composite. It's only 6 cables that are coming out. And then when I go to something like the head composite, I've got one separate piece. So even though the head is multiple things, I have this all separate, and it just makes things really clean. Now, one other note about making this clean, you can tell that I've got the overall artwork for the head, so let's kind of zoom in right now, and it allows me to just deactivate and activate it, and it's not going to be cluttered by the 100 other nodes that I've got in this very basic rig. By the way, this rig is super basic. There are rigs with like 500 pieces. Anyways, let's deactivate that. You can see that the head feather, I'm just going to press D and A to deactivate and activate. I've got this lower beak that most of the time you can't even see, but sometimes I'll have it open and close. I've got a lower neck, a middle neck, and a top neck piece, so you can kind of see as I select those. By the way, this is highlighting in purple because I have the transformation tool selected, but this is super critical. You want to be able to have these things isolated, and you want to have them built in a way that's pretty smart. On a note about getting your character to break, let me just go to the top neck and deactivate it. Lower neck, deactivate it, and you can see what I'm talking about. So in the previous segment, I talked about how I do the outline first, and then I do this rounded edge with the color. The whole idea with that is that it's going to be seamless as I try to go and make these things bend. You can see here's the other rounded area, so that shows a lot of overlap when I go and reveal the middle part of the neck. So no matter how I take this thing, and if I try to rotate or bend it, then it's going to work appropriately. So let me just kind of demonstrate that. Hopefully it's not going to break as I try to zoom in. You can see that it still kind of has a graceful curve as it goes around. It's not perfect, it's a little clunky, but remember, this is just a beginner rig. Okay, so one final note on setting up these separate little pass-through composites. And the way to do a pass-through is you click on this yellow dot, and in this drop-down menu, you change it from bitmap to pass-through. So part of the reason you do that is because this stuff is isolated, and even though you have certain pieces like the lower neck and the middle neck behind the head, you could see that the lower neck and the middle neck, those are at the higher end of the hierarchy. So these are more meaningful. They have more I guess, influence or control over some of these other portions, even though the head is the thing that we see up in the front. It's a really good way to keep your stuff organized and to set up different types of relationships. So the next thing that I want to talk about is setting up different controllers. So notice that I've got two different legs. This is the leg that's in the front of the character. This is the back leg. So let me just go select some of those pieces of art to show the back upper leg, the lower leg. And you can see that I've got a back toe and I've got a back front, or I've got a back toe number 2, which is the one that's in the backpack. And then I've got a back toe number 1. Those are just the naming conventions that I'm using. And then I've also got a back toe. So it's critical that you are organized and you're able to go and select these pieces of artwork and that you know what you're clicking on. But going to these three pieces with the toe, that they really make the foot. So it's important to take all 3 of those nodes that you can independently go and adjust, because it's nice if you do a little bit of squash and stretch as you go and try to adjust these pieces of artwork. You want to be able to go and select them and modify them accordingly, but it would be cool to have a controller just for the foot, especially if you get this thing to go and reach and grab something. Very, very critical, again, to use naming conventions and to try to take these three things and you group them together. Then you link that to the lower leg, and then you link it to the upper leg. The same goes with something like the torso. All right, so one final segment to kind of talk about all of this and how it works together. Just want to go select all these keyframes. I'm going to go delete them, and the focus is going to be on the top chain of the hierarchy. So even though it seems like the torso should be the boss of the character, there's like this saying that you kind of lead from the hips. Really, when you have a bipedal character, it's the hips themselves, which you kind of think of as the 2 legs. It seems like those are the things that should be the boss, but instead try to think of the belt itself as the piece that goes and collects and does, the main movement of the character. This is critical because when you've got this back leg that's moving and doing its thing, especially when you're working on a walk cycle, and you've got this front leg also doing its thing with the walk cycle, it's nice to have them as some kind of a parent that is, connecting everything together. But you're going to want the torso, which has the arms and the neck of your character following along. You want to be able to have this as a separate piece that's not necessarily going to be affected by the rotation of the whole rig. So if you're trying to rotate your character to lean forward with the main topmost controller, I think you're going to have some trouble. Instead, what I would do is I would separate the torso, so all of the upper body parts as one piece and then all of the lower body parts together. You can also go and take something like the 2 legs. Let's break those connections. If you take those 2 legs and then you go and group those together with a Shift P, or a Control P, pardon me, and then you take that thing, let's go set up that pivot point right over there, and then you take that and attach it to the hip controller. Then I think you're going to be in good shape, because then you can move both legs at the same time. You can move the torso at the same time, or independently of that, and then finally you can take the entire character Very, very critical because when your character is going to run and you're going to have those legs flailing, you're probably going to lean the body forward. And then later you can always do some squashy, stretchy type stuff and maybe a little bit of tilt. All right, so that concludes the whole playlist on Intro to the Node View. I hope you found this valuable. Do me a favor, go give this a try. I hope you make some kind of a crazy character using the Node View. Thanks for watching.